local patch has mud, be assured shorebirds will find it. Mud holds the key, fuel. The stuff is full of invertebrates, which these long distance travellers need in order to complete their migrations. This August it really has been a tale of 4 wetland sites, 2 local and 2 further out in NC. The 2 closest sites were Mapleview Farm and Jordan Lake, and Buckhorn Reservoir and the salt pond out at Cape Hatteras were our furthest sites. And all these sites had, for a brief time anyway, large areas of exposed wet soil along their edges. And we really did put in the effort to get out early regularly to visit these 4 sites, and it did pay off, as we had 18 shorebird species seen for August. And by the very act of being out looking for shorebirds, we encountered many other wetland specialists, which included little blue heron, anhinga, limpkin, woodstock and snowy egret, and all local lifers. August 2023 was one of the most enjoyable months birding in all the 7 years I've lived here, and this was due in part to the wonderful species which turned up this season, but also due to the interest for shorebirds within the local community. So here's how our local shorebird quest played out in August. Our closest shorebird site at Mapleview Farm turned out to be productive early in the month, whilst the lagoon's water was being pumped onto nearby crops. However, the muddy edge flooded after pumping ceased, but in that optimal period I managed to find 8 species of shorebird, which included an early pectoral sandpiper and this lesser yellowlegs. Not bad, as this site is the size of half a football pitch, but 10 minutes away and definitely the nearest good wader site in the area. Also managed to visit Jordan Lake several times throughout August to observe and count what species were passing through, and also to see what species were roosting in with the grey egrets, and it turned out to be quite a lot, so much so that it felt reminiscent of a more southern biogeographic zone, with species like anhinga, woodstocks, limpkin, and up to 15 little blue heron. There was a reasonable shallow edge in places, in the usual low spots, but large areas of potential shorebird feeding area remained well underwater at this point. Jordan Lake is an important bird area for a whole variety of migrating birds. So without the shorebird numbers, there was always something to watch as we waited for the bulk of shorebirds to move through. And this they started to do in earnest after the water level dropped significantly around the 16th of August, exposing a huge area of the mud we had all hoped for. Species involved in the movement included pectoral, least and semi-palmated sandpiper, semi-palmated plover, greater and lesser yellowlegs. And as observer coverage increased as the site was definitely attracting shorebirds, scarcer migrants started to be picked out of the crowd, with Wilson's Phalarope and Baird sandpiper being 2 of the species we were able to see, but were only able to film record shots as way too far for my setup, which reminds me to sort out some digiscoping gear before we're back out watching wildfowl this winter. Buckhorn Reservoir out near Wilson was consistently rewarding to watch, as water levels remained at a satisfactory level throughout the period. The lake produced a reasonable variety of the commoner shorebird migrants, but once our much nearer site at Jordan Lake became the place to be for shorebirds, we dropped this site as to curb a little greenhouse gas. After all, it was an hour away and the other side of Raleigh. But if I lived closer, I'll be there all the time during passage migration periods. It's a great site with huge potential as it's that much closer to the coastal intertidal zone. Shorebirds were using a half dozen or so muddy areas, one of which was accessible from the nearby official boat ramp on the east side of the lake. This excellent area had large areas of shallow water with wet mud combined, and is consistently productive each autumn, I gather. Reports of upland and buff-breasted sandpipers drew me out to the Outer Banks on the 26th and 27th of August in the hope of getting some moving footage of these enigmatic species. Unfortunately, I dipped both birds completely, but totally no worries, as it was fantastic to experience passage migration at the infamous salt pond right on Cape Hatteras. And not just shorebirds on the move, had some good passage numbers of terns and hirundines too. Some species of shorebirds can become very confiding if you're still and patient enough, and many of the birds present here didn't seem to mind and came very close to where I was standing with the scope and tripod. They were there for the mud after all, and I was standing in it. And by the end of the first day, I had seen most of the commoner passage and resident species, and it was awesome to just loaf around the Cape, taking footage and birding for the rest of the day. It's not often you get the chance to come out to the furthest place east in North Carolina, or in fact furthest east for the next 1,000 miles south of here. Oh yeah, and I had to put this sequence in of the brown pelicans as it's one of my most complete single take shots ever. I was really happy with it as it flows nicely, and you really get the feel of how these birds assist each other with lift by flying in formation like this. It's a pelican roller coaster, and I love watching these fellas. The morning of our second day produced 5 immature yellow-crowned night herons, which had obviously come in overnight, as they definitely weren't there the previous day. I'd never seen the immatures before, only the adults, which were far less drab, but excited to see so many in one place. But the absolute highlight of the morning's birding was a group of 6 short-billed dowitchers that came in off the sea and landed right in front of me and started feeding, suggesting that the 6 were a migratory group heading south. This species winter in North Carolina, but these birds in all probability were heading to the wintering quarters perhaps south as far as southern Peru or northern Brazil. This least sandpiper was very confiding as it foraged close to where I was standing, and it was great to see all the bird's distinguishing features of this sometimes confusing peep. But note this bird's obvious reddish tones to the upper parts and the light green legs, features which are normally visible at some distance. Least sandpipers are more compact also, making a more hunched up posture than that of the more elongated, flatter, semi-palmated sandpiper. And as the morning progressed, it was obvious that we weren't going to bump into any upland or buff-breasted sandpipers, but did bump into a group of 19 passage black terns that drifted onto the lake for a time before moving off. And we managed to find this nice Caspian tern in amongst the much more numerous royal terns. And I'll leave you with some sights and sounds of Cape Hatteras. Thanks for watching, and see you next time on the Eno Branch Biological Station.